Hello there and welcome. Thank you for listening in. Today, I am meeting with a client of mine. And so I'm looking forward to introducing you to him. My name is Alanna Levenson, and I'm with I Love My Life Coaching. And I've been coaching for almost 20 years. I've worked with a lot of industries, a lot of types of clients, both in corporate and entrepreneurs. And today I'm happy to introduce you to Ed Yoder, who is with Dagny Builders. And he has a pretty interesting background that we're going to get into first. So Ed, welcome. Thanks for being with me today.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Good.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. No, I'm looking forward to this. So I've learned a few things about you during our coaching sessions, but one of the things that I find interesting, simply because I grew up in a very different way. I grew up in California in a different type of lifestyle, and Ed is from East Central Illinois and grew up Amish. So share with us, growing up Amish, which is pretty unique, especially to the rest of us. How did that upbringing shape your work ethic and your values?
Well, I guess it's pretty obvious that growing up Amish, I didn't know anything different. So it's not like my frame of reference was simply this is the way it's always been. But looking back, we were very poor and had no idea we were poor. We had no idea how poor we were. We were too busy just enjoying life or living life, I guess. But the fact that we had to work for everything we had, and we never, like everything we did, we pretty much grew. We were self-sufficient for the most part, and lived on a farm, so we grew a lot of our own food and so forth. But I think all those things contributed to learning about life, figuring things out as you go, and just kind of. I'm not sure how that. Taking that and applying it to everyday life as an adult out in the world helped teach things, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about, so, I grew up in a middle class neighborhood in Southern California, and my parents paid for my first year of college. But in dating myself, that was when the Gulf War hit. And, things got tough in the construction industry. My dad was also in construction. And by the way, those that are listening, Ed has a roofing business in Illinois. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But I remember when the Gulf War hit and my parents called me up and said, the construction industry is hurting right now. And we don't know if we can afford to keep you where you are. And so I had a choice. I could either move home or I could get a job. I ended up getting 3 jobs while going to school full time. And I think, really having to work gave me a good work ethic and a good set of values that I think supported me in, my career, and then also eventually creating my own coaching business. So I would imagine, having to really literally cultivate everything that you had, create everything that you had, and how that could contribute to, who you are as a person, your personal values, your professional values, and then what kind of work ethic that would give you.
Yeah, it's kind of like adversity always brings good things about, right? So I'm so thankful for all the hard times I had, if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
Although at the time it's not. A lot of the quote unquote hard times weren't. I didn't even know they were hard times. It was what it was. But as a young kid, so I don't know if I told you before, but I grew up in 3 different Amish communities. So I grew up in Missouri. That's where I was born at, and it's about a little over an hour east of Kansas City, Jamesport, Missouri. And then when I was 11 years old, we moved out of there into Bloomfield, Iowa, another Amish community, which is a little bit more, their rules were a little bit more relaxed, they were a little bit more liberal on what was allowed as far as the the toys
Mm,
or the conveniences they were allowed to have. But the big appealing thing about that community that my dad wanted to move to was that they had a much better disciplined youth group. So
okay.
Jamesport was pretty rowdy at that time, and Bloomfield was a lot more. And we were kids growing up, so he was pretty concerned for our how these kids were going to grow up. A lot of partying and stuff in Missouri,
Interesting.
but I don't remember where I was going. Oh, anyway, so in Missouri, that was during the late '70s and early '80s when we had some pretty hard winters, and like there was times when it was 20 below zero, and we were out watering the hogs and thawing out water for the animals, at 7 or 8 o'clock at night on the days before had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do our chores to go to school the next day. And I remember that as being miserable, but I don't remember that as being unusual. In my mind, this is how it is in the wintertime if you're Amish on a farm. It's just the way it was.
So
But
yeah,
that has really, I don't know, it had to have changed or shaped me as who I am as an adult.
absolutely. Yes. I mean, being part of what I love about what I do is I get to work with such a wide variety of
Mm-hmm.
clients. I've worked with people all over the United States with various upbringings and even people internationally as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
I love learning about the early experiences that shape people and give us those values and work ethics because they very much impact who we become and
Mm-hmm.
what's important to us. And, like you said earlier about adversity or what you even deem as adversity, because for you, that's just how life was, right? This is just
Yeah.
what you do. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And then when we're growing up, that's just kind of the little bubble that we're in. And it's not until we get older and, depending on what choices you make,
Mm-hmm.
so I went off to college. Some people don't go off to college. Um, some people stay in the Amish community. And I know you left, so we're going to get into that. But,
Yeah.
and then, you made some bold choices and it opened up your world. So with that, like what were some of the biggest transitions or adjustments
Mm-hmm.
moving from Amish life to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, so I was 16 when I left, and it's basically I ran away and went to work on a dairy farm. So it's not like I moved straight off of an Amish farm into the inner city or something, or whatever. So it was a little bit of a uh, easier transition, more so than it could have been. But still, right at that age, at the very impressionable age, and where the social life is a big deal. And I think the biggest challenge was my social interactions with others. Like you can imagine a sheltered Amish boy who'd never. I don't know that I had ever watched the first TV show. I briefly watched 10 seconds of TV or whatever, in passing before that, but going from that to having the entire world at my disposal, or at least so it seemed.
Yeah.
So, and then with other kids my age, getting to know them and interact with them. That was uh, I was always a social butterfly, so it didn't take me real long to kind of figure out what you don't do and what's not cool and what's
Which is
just
good.
so
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah.
So I adapted and quickly had a group of friends, but that was, I think, probably the most difficult one at the time.
Mm,
And then, of course, looking back as an adult, what I see now as the biggest challenge, unknowing to me at the time, was to figure out which were good choices and which were not good choices to make in terms of I got into partying and rowdy. Started running with the wrong group of friends for several years and that kind of thing. But just yeah, the toughest thing for me, I think, was probably to figure myself out socially.
yeah.
But
Well, it's figuring out ourselves socially helps us figure out who we are as a person, right? It's part of
yeah.
that, that self awareness, self reflection, just getting
Mm-hmm.
to know who we are as a person. And, I think it's pretty common because when I think back to how I was in my late teens and 20s, I was a bit, let's just say, rebellious and adventurous as well, even though I went off to college. And luckily, I held it together and, knew what was important and made sure that I went to classes and did my homework and did the best that I could in school. And then when I had to work, right? Like if I wanted to stay where I was versus moving home, I had to work. So there were lots of lessons there too. So I can relate, even though we come from, our transition into our early adulthood was a bit different. But yeah, I appreciate that. So, when you think about what's going on today, are there any values or skills from your Amish upbringing that you still incorporate into your life and your business?
Yes, absolutely. But we grew up figuring things out. If you didn't know it, you would talk to someone who may have an idea, you'd listen to someone else or whatever, but there were some things that you had to go to experts for, that only one person knew how to do or whatever. But most of the stuff on the farm, there's some baling wire involved and some duct tape and those kind of things. But there was also some very practical things that, my dad would go and build something that just worked. It may have never been done this way before, but this is the way he figured out to make it work, and it worked. And that, I think, has shaped a lot of my growing up. That has just over and over, I keep thinking back to things, wonder how my dad would do this or whatever.
That's
which I'm working with different technology from what my dad did, quite, in some ways, but a lot of times it's still kind of the same idea. You just take something and figure it out, make it work, improve it. And I think that's kind of the Amish are very resourceful in a lot of different ways. And the other part of it, I always tell people that there are a few people who are more resourceful than a fence crowding ex-Amishman, because as a kid or even as an Amish person in good standing, they have these pretty strict rules of what you're allowed to have and do and so forth. And a lot of times those rules are designed to be fair, but they're still rules. And they're always, like every other member of every other society, everyone is always trying to figure out how far you can push those rules and what you can do to make things work, but still stay within the rules without getting in trouble. And I think every Amish person has become quite adept at that. So that's probably helped me in my life.
Yeah. Well, that's fun to hear though, because whether you grew up Amish or say in California, what I'm hearing is that that kind of pushing the boundaries, if you will, and experimenting and see what you can get away with, like rule breaking. Maybe that's just an aspect of who we are as human beings. And then that helps us in our learning and our growth. Right.
Well, go ahead. I think in the Amish, in the case of the Amish, like they're very cautious not to break the rules. Right. But they like to bend it as far as they can right up. The point of breaking rules that'd be wrong. That would be sinful and it'd be crossing the line. But as long as you can bend them as far as they'll go without breaking them, you're in good standing. So,
I love it. Yeah.
Kind of a unique approach to it, I guess.
All about perspective, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate you also bringing up about the resourcefulness, because I hate to say this, but in some ways, how I grew up, I didn't always have opportunity to figure out what that meant for myself. And then until I went off to college and had to get a job, right? To make that choice. And then even after graduating, continuing to work. And ever since that, that's an aspect of being resourceful and really tapping into, your own capabilities. And I think sometimes that gets lost depending on where somebody grows up or what kind of education they get, where we actually end up taking that away from kids or people that are going to, soon to be young adults. And it's a shame, actually.
Yeah. Everything has to be, if they don't, a good example of that is right after I was 18 and I'd gotten my first car, my friends at the time we were talking about changing a tire, on a car, and I had a car with, had worked on it, done my own maintenance kind of stuff. And something came about changing a tire, and they had just gotten out of high school where they went through driver's ed, where they were taught how to change a tire, by the book. And the book shows you put the jack here and you do this and whatever. That's not how you do it. I replaced tires. And they all laughed, like, how would you know? You grew up in a horse and buggy and, whatever. But I didn't have anyone tell me how to do it, but I just discovered I had to figure out where you put the jack, that you don't bend the body, but you still lift where you want to lift, And I just remember that as a kind of, it was one of those social things, I guess. It was a lesson I learned that you don't go there,
Oh man.
But at the same time, it also gave me some insight on how this works. If you're taught a certain way and this is how you do it, you're probably not going to get outside of that because you have the information. You've been given it in a nice little box, and that's how it works. But if you have to figure it out on your own, there may be 2 or 3 different ways that would work in different cases or whatever. And just one little thing, I guess, that I filed away for future reference and didn't realize it at the time.
Yes. Well, and that's interesting too, because that there's that kind of thinking that shows up in the workplace all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, we've always done it that way. Why would we change? Yeah. And this is where, sometimes leaders unknowingly allow for a space where innovation doesn't occur, because they just accept that, whether it's their own a limited perspective or somebody else on the team, or everybody's thinking that way, like, there's that saying, like, what ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, sure. And sometimes, when it comes to competition, or you need to evolve and grow, or you need to expand in some way, that's when you're going to require outside of the box innovative thinking and figuring things out and trying new things. But it's funny. My dad was a general contractor, and the more I work with people in the construction space, the more I wish my dad had said, hey, because I have 2 sisters, right? Like, hey, girls, I'm going to show you how to do this. This is going to be an important skill for you guys to learn. But I don't know if it's because he didn't think we were interested, and who knows, maybe I wouldn't have been interested at the time. But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, God, I wish I knew how to do this, or I wish I knew how to change a tire. And
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of times we want to project what we want, to our children, but they may or may not pick it up. My view on that with my kids is that I'm gonna at least drag them to the water, whatever way. I'm gonna make them at least look at it.
Yes.
But then they can choose whether they want to take it from there or not. But I'm going to at least do everything I can to give them the opportunity. And then the rest is up to them.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. So as far as the Amish lifestyle, because again, I didn't even really know about it until I got older, and I go, oh, there's a whole different type of culture that exists here in the same country called the Amish, and they live very differently. I know that sounds really naive, but at some point I just never really learned about it until I got older. So what is something that people often misunderstand about the Amish lifestyle, especially in relation to work and community?
Well, I think a lot of people think the Amish are somehow, they may hold them up a little bit higher than, like the Amish right now anyway. There's been periods where the Amish weren't looked upon very favorably, for various reasons. But I think right now, with some of the more public exposures they've had in the recent decade or so, that they're looked upon as favorably for the most part. And one of those things is that they're very hardworking and always honest and very moral people. But people forget they're human beings.
Yeah.
And within every culture, whatever the culture is generally known for, there's still always going to be people who are not that. And then when you see one who doesn't, who misrepresent, or who doesn't act the way you expect them to, people are like, well, oh, I thought they were all this way, but now it turns out they're all that way, or whatever. Yeah. So there's people in the Amish community who are lazy, just like any other. They're not all hardworking, it turns out, but in general, they promote good values and probably a little better than the rest of society, but there are still a lot of human beings, just like any
Yes.
other culture.
And as human beings, we are not perfect. There's a
No,
lot of, right?
absolutely not. That is for sure. Yeah.
Regardless of where we come from or how we live, right?
Yes. Yep. And I guess another thing is that everyone that I've met, I shouldn't say everyone, but a very common misconception was that the Amish don't have to pay taxes, right? I don't know
Oh,
where that comes from. I
okay.
wish that were true, but there is a Social Security exemption. They do have exemption from Social Security. That goes back to the 50s. It actually went all the way to the Supreme Court. But other than that, they pay taxes like everyone else. But if they join the Amish church, become a member, they can opt out of the whole Social Security system. So they don't pay or receive
Oh, gotcha.
if they
Okay.
have
Oh,
that
that's
exemption.
interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did
But
not
other
know
than,
that.
yeah, it would be so nice to be able to take advantage of that. But I was never a church member, so I'm not eligible for that exemption.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other
That's
topic,
an
right?
entirely different.
Yeah, I could go into that
Yeah.
one too, but
And,
yeah.
yeah, kind of along the same lines. I think that a lot of I don't know. I think the Amish are a very good example of how a voluntarist society can function
Ah, yeah.
without the state, because they certainly see themselves as subject to the state and they consider it a higher civil authority, but their ultimate authority is God. And I think up until maybe recently, it may have shifted from that a little bit, but in most cases, if there's a conflict between God's authority and the state's authority, they have very small hesitation to which they answer to first.
Yep.
And usually they try to find a compromise if there is one. But if it comes down to where it's one or the other, they will have most time will have uh, no hesitation to defy the state authorities in the interest of remaining true to their biblical principles. And
Absolutely.
the Amish was actually kind of born out of that. I don't know if how familiar you are with the Reformation in that era, but the Anabaptists were a group of this kind of where this all started, right? Is during the Reformation, and they were persecuted pretty heavily on both the Protestant and the Catholics. They were disliked by everyone and executed quite a lot of them. And so the Amish kind of traced their roots all the way back to that, and it's always been a case of just being a little suspicious of any governmental authority. They've never had good interactions with them or whatever. But a very well functioning society without like their disciplinary methods are nonviolent. Like there's
Uh-huh.
no violence used and no coercions. It's all it's purely a social pressure that's used for to keep order, I guess. And that can, you could make an entire, 3 or 4 hour discussion on that, the pros and cons of it, what works, what doesn't, and the morality of it and all that. It's kind of a different subject, but it does work. It's effective, I guess, is the point of it,
Yeah.
without using violence or the threat of violence.
Well, this is what this makes me think about. And I wish we had more time to get into it
Yeah.
more deeply. What I will say, though, and acknowledge is, especially because, and this leads me to my next question. First, I'll say, because of where we're at as a society in the
Mm-hmm.
US, at least, I can't necessarily speak for other countries, even though I'm always doing what I can to learn and keep up to date about what's going on. But I think more and more people are becoming curious and actually wanting to become more of a self-functioning,
Yes.
right? So either a community way of life versus before. Mm-hmm. More and more people are moving out of the city and right. And so they're curious and taking action in that way, mm-hmm. as well as, again, we won't go down the rabbit hole, but just to acknowledge it, that what you said about government authority and really mm-hmm. questioning that, like what is right, what is not, mm-hmm. What is working, what isn't, and what might be considered overreach. So with that, what can people learn from the Amish that's applicable to how
Mhm.
our world is evolving today?
Yeah, I think one one of a very good one example, I guess, is that if there's differences of opinions or adversity or some conflict, I guess there's almost never a time when it can't be worked out peacefully. You don't have to go running to a higher authority to settle it for you, and occasionally that's appropriate. You go get someone else involved. If two people have a conflict that they can't settle, but almost always, if you are willing to work with someone just a little bit, it'll come back. And I think that is one thing that's practiced within the Amish community almost everywhere. Obviously, there are exceptions. What I tell people when I discuss the Amish is that there's two words that should not be used when you're discussing the Amish, and it's always and never.
Yeah.
Because by the time you think that the Amish would never do X, Y, or Z, or that you think they always do X, Y, or Z, you find that one community somewhere that's the exception, because it's a very diverse. Um, there's so many different communities with a wide variety of traditions and rules and regulations, I guess. But the one thing that's almost universal, and I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, but I can't think of it off the top of my head, but their disputes are always settled peacefully. And when I say peaceful, I don't mean the absence of raised voices or
Sure. Yeah.
heated tempers or whatever, but without resorting to bloodshed or
Yeah.
or the force, the threat of that.
And that could be a really great example, actually, especially of some things that are starting to occur these
Mhm.
days. And again, in terms of the work that I do, I mean, communicating, problem solving
Yeah.
comes up a lot, and it's fascinating. Well, and managing emotions, right? So managing, what are you feeling, and then managing those emotions, and then figuring out a way to resolve, like conflict resolution, right, is a
Mhm.
term that shows up a lot in the work world. And so, yeah, that sounds like it could be a
Yeah.
great example, actually, in that. Yeah.
De-escalating. I think they would
Yes.
probably be very good. De-escalating would be a word that would be appropriate there. Like if there's something, that is something we would be taught from the time we were a child, that you de-escalate it. We'll get back to this. It doesn't have to be settled right now, but pray about it, think about it, figure it out, whatever.
I love it.
Speak slowly, or there's a proverb in there somewhere that he who is slow to anger. I don't remember the rest of it.
But that's
I
a
knew it
good
when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, trust me, I forgot a lot. Of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
growing up, unfortunately, I haven't always practiced that. I'm not, I'm guilty of not always making the best judgment in those ways, but I still believe it's good advice.
Absolutely. I agree. So is there anything else that you want the viewers to know about the Amish that's important right now?
So many different things, a lot of things. I love talking about the Amish, and I love the fact that that's who I am. Even though I'm not Amish now, it's what made me who I am now. And although I've chosen not to be Amish in my adulthood, I wish I could give my children the exact same experience I had and still offer them the worldly conveniences that I have now. It's kind of, I kind of consider myself as having had the best of all worlds.
Mm.
Um, but I guess the one misconception that I think that I'm always sad to hear people think, that my parents and I are estranged, or that I am shunned from the Amish because of the choice I have made. That's not the case. I love my parents. They love me. We have no animosity, although I have to say they're very disappointed that I left. And there is a little bit of a strain in our relationship. There's certainly there's that. But a misconception that a lot of people have is that when you leave the Amish, you're forever shunned, or forever like completely out of their lives forever. That's just not the case in most cases. There's a few exceptions, few very, very strict communities where they have something similar to that. But
Yeah.
in large part, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's good to hear. Yeah, that there's a way to work that out. And again, that's another great example. And I think maybe, without being able to ask everybody, I would imagine that the reason people think that is because they've observed that of people from other religions or, cultures, that does happen quite frequently.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a bad assumption or misconception, as you said. But again, it's like you said, it's not always across the board. And I get
correct.
Yeah. Depends on the family. So
also, one other thing that I would like, you were asking what I think the people should know about the Amish or whatever. And I think probably it's probably likely that most people have figured this out or are aware of this. But if you see it on TV and if it's a show about the Amish, it is most likely 90% fiction.
That's
and
right,
does not portray an accurate depiction of. There was several shows, and I actually have a friend who was one of the main characters on one of these shows back 15 years ago or so.
Funny.
And I know him personally. I know the way he grew up, and I saw what they did on the show, and I had I'd shake my head at this stuff that he would go through or pretend, in order to make a good TV show, but it's not accurate. And then there was the one, the more recent one where it had a mafia, something about a mafia, Amish mafia or something like that. I think it may have been the name.
No.
Yeah, I think that was the name of the show actually. And I can't speak for that community or how things are in the area in which this was filmed, but let's just say I have never seen any Amish community that's quite the way that they portrayed it. So, but it made a great TV show. Just I
mean, that's the goal, right? Of the
that's entertainment.
It's for drama.
That's what TV is all about anyway, right? That's
entertainment purposes.
Bring eyeballs.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you added that in though, because that's important for people to know, just in case subconsciously they saw something like that and they think, oh, that's how it is. No. So yeah.
And I suppose every show about everything that, there's always the people who are part of that particular industry or that culture or whatever. If there's a show about, like the firefighting show that's popular, or Chicago Fire or whatever that is, I'm sure there are firefighters sitting there just shaking their head at what they're seeing. Like, that is not how this works. Trucking shows, I've seen shows where they had semis and that stuff that there's supposed to, supposedly happens. I laugh at it as a former truck driver myself. Like, that's not how trucks work. It's not how this works, but it makes a good TV show.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it helps us get lost in another world. I mean, I haven't watched TV in probably a year and a half now. I ended up turning it off, but
lucky you.
But it's easy to get sucked into it. Believe me.
I know.
Turn
your brain off and turn the TV on.
Yep.